The village of Nkara lay nestled in a fertile cradle between emerald hills, its breath in rhythm with the river Nile. The river was no ordinary stream. Its waters sang stories if one listened closely, old chants flowing with every ripple. Elders often said the river carried the voices of those who walked before, ancestors whose wisdom whispered in the lapping of waves against stone. Children learned early not to shout or bleed near its edge. Women hummed low songs while fetching water, and men bowed their heads when crossing. It was known, sacred was the river and sacred was its law. No innocent blood must ever mingle with its current. The law had held for generations even during harsh seasons. But that year something was wrong. The rains hesitated. Fields cracked under the cruel sun, and crops curled like the limbs of the dying. The yam harvest failed. The bananas blackened on the stem. Chickens stopped laying. The great fig tree whose roots once drank deep from Nile turned pale. Then the animals began to die in strange ways. Goats foamed at the mouth. Cattle twisted and fell, their legs too weak to hold them. Birds flew in frightened circles, then dropped midair like curses tossed from the clouds. The villagers gathered daily at the central square, whispering about the signs. Women clutched charms, muttering prayers. Men sharpened spears they didn't know how to aim against drought. That's when the murmurs started, faint at first, like a wind unsure of its own direction. Perhaps the ancestors are angry, someone muttered. Perhaps someone among us has offended them, said another. There must be a reason. Fear eats logic. And fear, once planted, grows like wildfire in dry brush. In the council hut, where the village elders met under a roof of woven reed and time-worn bark, the whispers thickened like storm clouds. Chief Bulow, once a man of balance, stared long at his carved staff before speaking. We have fasted. We have burned offerings. We have sent drums to the sky. And yet Nile does not rise. One elder, Okani, thin as smoke, voice sharp as a heron's beak, leaned forward. There is an imbalance. A spirit walking among us who does not belong. We must restore the balance. Others nodded slowly. Balance meant sacrifice. It always had, though rarely spoken aloud. The name came from a bitter tongue. What of the girl Asida? At first, the silence that followed cracked louder than thunder. Then murmurs. Then nods. The villagers knew her, the quiet girl who arrived 3 harvests ago, carried in on the back of a trader's cart after her parents were claimed by a distant war. She had no clan, no protector, and her eyes always seemed to watch the river too long. She spoke to birds. She touched stones and smiled. Strange, they had always said. Different. She came when the rain stopped, Okani said. Since she arrived, things have withered. But she's just a girl, one elder offered. Exactly, Okani replied. No one would suspect her. That is how spirits work, in silence. Outside, Asida walked past the river barefoot, carrying an empty calabash. She paused to stare into its waters, her reflection rippling, warping, then disappearing in a sudden gust of wind. Behind her the trees shifted. A crow called once, sharp and lonely. That night, a small procession of elders came to the hut where Asida slept. They did not knock. They stood in silence, waiting until she emerged. She did not flinch at their presence, only tilted her head slightly, like someone who had already dreamed this moment. The river has been wronged, Chief Bulow said, not meeting her eyes. And it is my fault? Asida's voice did not tremble. We cannot say, he said. But the river asks for balance. And the ancestors are silent. Asida did not cry. She simply placed her calabash on the ground, its clay rim catching a faint silver glint of moonlight. If the river wants me, she whispered, it must take me whole. Not as guilt, not as fear, but as truth. The next sunrise would bring the ceremony. Asida would walk barefoot down the sacred path, her arms bound in vine, surrounded by drummers and silent villagers. None would speak her name aloud. None would cry out. And when she stepped into the sacred water, all would avert their eyes. But even the river had rules older than man. And what it did with Asida would change the village forever. Asida moved like a whisper through the village of Nkara, unnoticed when she wished and radiant when she didn't. Her hands, stained green from crushing herbs, healed both skin and spirit. She had a way with children, a silence that made even crying infants settle in her arms. But those who watched closely also saw something else. The way the river stirred when she passed, the birds that fluttered strangely around her hut, the goat that once gave birth with her hands simply resting on its belly. A few older women whispered blessings. Others turned away and crossed themselves with river dust. In the compound of Chief Dondo, where politics brewed like a bitter leaf stew, Asita's name was suddenly on too many lips. It began with the new wife. Mambika, tall and glossy-skinned, was brought from the east, where she was rumored to have danced with spirits before becoming the chief's favored. She had a laugh like cracked thunder and eyes that missed nothing. From the moment she arrived, she noted how often people whispered Asita's name, how the old women brought her baskets, how the children mimicked her quiet walk. It irked Mambika more than she admitted. "She is too soft for this world," she said once to the chief as he rubbed her shoulders. "And too loved. That is always dangerous." Still, Chief Dondo, bloated with power and age, only grunted. "She is a girl with leaves in her hair. Let her mix her herbs." But fate, or perhaps the river, would not let things stay quiet. It started with the child of a visiting merchant, who fell ill one morning with a twisted neck and eyes that rolled like marbles. Asita was called and she came, pressed leaves to the child's skin, murmured chants taught by her mother, and the child calmed. But as the fever broke, a strange birthmark bloomed behind the child's ear, shaped like a fishbone. The merchant, a man with too many debts and too little faith, saw it as a curse. "She's marked him," he cried. "With river magic." The second sign came with the drum. The harvest drum of Nkara, an old sacred relic carved from the first tree planted by the river's mouth, cracked down its center during a full moon. Elders claimed they heard a woman's cry in the night, a long wail that rose and vanished like steam. The drum had stood for 5 generations. No one had touched it. No one, except Asita, who had once sat beside it during a festival, resting her hand along its rim while children danced. Then a drought. The river ran thin. Fish floated belly up. The village prayed, bled goats, danced and beat pots, but the sky stayed dry. And in the silence, suspicion grew. Mambika, ever watchful, stirred the pot carefully. "She was born of the river, was she not?" she asked during a council meeting. Her mother bled into Niall. They say she sank with the umbilical cord still tying her to the girl. "What child lives through that but one not fully ours?" An elder spoke, hesitant. "It is true, her mother died giving birth on the river's edge. Some say the water carried her body away before her last breath left her." Asita never cried. Not once. "And now," Mambika added smoothly, "the river dries. The animals die. The sacred drum is broken. Perhaps it cries through other means." And so the whisper became a chant. Asita, the girl of green-stained fingers. The girl who sang with the birds and made herbs bloom in dry soil. The girl who never cried. When they came for her, she was kneeling near her mother's grave, laying white petals upon the earth. There was no fight. She rose, brushed her hands and faced them. Her eyes, wide and brown like soft clay, stared at each of the elders as though searching for something they themselves had forgotten. "You know me," she said simply. "You have eaten what I've healed. You have sent your children to my hut." And still they bound her hands. The walk through the village was long. The people of Nkara stood in doorways, unsure whether to hide or curse. Some threw river pebbles at her feet. One woman hissed and spat. Others looked away. But some, especially the children, cried silently. Tano, the youngest boy in the village and barely 5, broke free from his mother's grip and ran after her, clutching a dried root she had given him for sleep. "They said you're the river," he whispered through tears. "But you're just Asita." She bent as far as her ropes allowed and kissed his forehead. "I am still that." The elders gathered in the square, their backs stiff and cloaks thick with dust. A great fire had been lit. Mambika sat beside Chief Dondo, her arms crossed, face unreadable. Behind her, the carved horn of judgment lay across the chief's feet. "She is to be questioned," announced Elder Boma. "To face the truth. If her soul is clean, the river will speak." They brought forward the merchant's child, now healed but still marked. Asita only looked at him and nodded. He dreamed of water and fish. I helped him find peace. They brought the harvest drum, now splintered. Asita touched it gently and a strange hum echoed faintly, a sound only a few heard. They brought a jar of river water and asked her to sip it. "It is not the river," she said, setting it aside. "The river is not in jars." Each answer calm. Each question more agitated. Mambika leaned in. "Ask her the old question. The one from before." Elder Boma hesitated. "You speak of—" "Yes. Let the river decide." And so they brought the relic, a stone bowl carved by the first water priestess of Nkara. Inside was dust from the river's bed, dry and cracked. "If you are innocent," Boma said, "then this dust will remain dust. If you are not, it will drink." Asita, bound and tired, looked into the bowl. Her eyes filled with something unreadable. I do not fear what drinks. The bowl was passed hand to hand until it came to Mambika. She stared into it, lifted a handful of dust and tossed it toward Asita's face. The wind turned, and the dust curved, not toward Asita but backward, hitting Mambika squarely in the chest. Gasp! A hiss from the flames. The bowl cracked. No one spoke. In the silence that followed, the chief finally rose. His steps were unsure, heavy. He walked to Asita and looked into her eyes. The river must decide. She said nothing, only nodded. And so it was declared. By the next moon, Asita would be taken to the river Nile, bound and cast into its deepest bend, where the current runs swift and shadows sleep beneath the lilies. If she was cursed, the river would swallow her. If she was pure, the river would change. That was the old law. That was the river's law. The village of Nkara murmured for days. Some said she would drown. Some said she would fly. Others whispered that the river had already chosen her, long before her birth. Asita waited in the hut once used for lepers and exiled wives. She asked for no visitors. But the night before the ritual, someone crept in, a small figure, cloaked in cloth, clutching a flower she had once grown for healing burns. It was Tano. They say you'll leave, he whispered, his cheeks wet. But I told the river to be kind. She took the flower and placed it behind his ear. I told it too, she whispered back. But the river listens only to truth. And then she looked at the moon. A single tear rolled down her cheek, slow and glimmering. The first she'd ever shed. The ground beneath her shifted, just slightly. But enough. And somewhere outside the frogs stopped singing. Outline part bro. The moon did not rise that night. It was as if the heavens themselves refused to witness what the village of Nkara had prepared to do. Smoke from the elders' torches curled into the thick air, wavering like uncertain spirits, and the scent of burnt palm leaves clung to everyone's skin. The villagers assembled in a crescent around the riverbank, their expressions blank, as though they were trying to silence the guilt welling inside them with the beat of drums and muttered justifications. Asita stood in the center, her arms bound by vines soaked in river mud. Her face was calm, not defiant, not broken, just still. The wind played gently with her braids and she did not cry, even as the elders declared the decision. The chief, adorned in leopard skin, stood tall beside his wife Mambika, who watched the girl with narrowed eyes and folded arms. This is no joy for us, the chief said, but his voice lacked sorrow. The ancestors must be appeased. The drought, the animals, the cracked harvest drum, too many signs have warned us. The river must take the cursed. A murmur passed through the crowd like a tremor. No one looked directly at Asita. Her silence unsettled them. Some whispered that her calm was another sign of her unnaturalness, her connection to the river that took her mother, that watched her grow up motherless but never voiceless. They said she spoke to herbs like they answered back. That she touched sick children and they either healed or worsened but never stayed the same. Mambika stepped forward. Let the river take back what it gave, she said, voice ringing cold. And let balance return to the land. Asita turned her eyes to the river. The water moved slowly, thick and glossy under the night's darkness. A few frogs croaked. An owl called once. Then silence swallowed everything. 2 guards stepped forward and took her by the arms. Asita stumbled a little but found her footing, walking without struggle toward the waiting boat. It was not large, just wide enough to carry a small body and 2 rowers. Its frame had been painted with ash. The villagers stepped back as if afraid her curse would leap from her skin into their own bones. As she climbed into the boat, she looked at no one. Only the river. One of the rowers, a young man named Below, paused. He had seen her help his sister recover from fever 2 seasons ago. His hands trembled on the oar, but he said nothing. The boat pushed off. Silence reigned over the water. The drums stopped. Not even the crickets sang. The river stretched out like black silk beneath a sky empty of stars. Asita knelt in the boat, her hands still tied, her chin raised. The elders began to chant, a hollow string of phrases meant to invoke ancestral forgiveness. But the words felt brittle, forced, as if even their tongues doubted the ritual. Mambika's gaze never left Asita. Her eyes glittered with something that could have been satisfaction or fear. The boat reached the middle of the river. Below hesitated, looking toward the other rower. That man gave a sharp nod. They stood and took hold of Asita. She did not struggle. She leaned forward and whispered something too soft to hear. Then, with one swift movement, they pushed her over the side. She hit the water without a splash. The surface rippled once, like a breath held and released. Then the river stilled. There were no bubbles. No thrashing limbs. No gurgled screams. Just silence. The villagers waited. A few leaned closer, expecting something. A sign. But there was only the thick stillness of the river, unmoving under the weight of what had been done. The rowers turned the boat around. Below kept glancing over his shoulder. The further they moved from the center, the heavier the air grew. By the time they reached the bank, the wind had picked up. It wasn't fierce, but strange, cool against their backs, warm against their cheeks, as if the very temperature had lost its sense of direction. The elders mumbled prayers. The chief turned to the people. Let us go now. Let the river speak when it is ready. The crowd slowly dispersed. Mothers pulled children close. Old men leaned heavier on their canes. People did not speak. The drums were not resumed. Fires were not lit. The village of Nkara returned to their homes without laughter, without relief. That night no one slept well. The wind howled through thatched roofs and under doors. The animals were restless. Goats kicked at their pens. Chickens refused to roost. Somewhere, a newborn wailed without stopping until dawn. The river too was restless. Its surface, usually humming with insects and gentle ripples, remained perfectly still. A surface so flat it looked like stone. Fishermen who rose early in the morning found their nets dry and untouched. No fish, no frogs, no eels. Nothing stirred. Children sent to fetch water returned pale, whispering that the river felt wrong. It looks back at you, one girl said, clutching her gourd. Like it knows your name. By the second day the elders gathered again. The silence of the river had grown heavier. Not a single leaf floated on its surface. The trees closest to the bank had lost their green, and the ground beneath them had turned soft and black. On the third day Mambika fell ill. Feverish and muttering in her sleep, she clawed at her neck, screaming that vines were choking her. The herbalist who tried to tend her found her skin unusually cold, despite the fire in her eyes. When they tried to give her water from the river, the calabash cracked. The chief called for another ritual, but no one dared approach the river again. Children whispered that they heard singing at night, not human, not bird. Something in between. A girl's voice, sweet and low. And the river, still silent by day, glowed faintly under the moonless sky. By the fourth day, all the fish in the chief's ponds floated belly up. The village dogs howled at dusk and vanished by morning. Still the river did not move. It did not flow. It did not forgive. By the end of the week, even the bravest of the elders would not go near its bank. And though no one said it aloud, they all knew the truth they had tried to bury beneath chance and tradition. The river had not accepted the sacrifice. It had only swallowed it. And it was waiting. The fourth morning breaks with an eerie calm, as though the earth itself is holding its breath. Farmers who rise early to fetch water from River Nile stop in their tracks, buckets clattering from stunned hands. The river, once a mirror of the sky, now glows a soft, terrifying crimson. It isn't the color of mud after a storm, it's translucent, shimmering with a hue that looks more like living blood. The entire village of Nkara gathers at the riverbanks, murmurs rippling like the wind through dry grass. Children are pulled behind mothers. Elders lean forward, squinting. Even the birds seem hesitant to sing. The chief, his robes hurriedly thrown over his nightwear, stands at the river's edge with his advisors. Behind him, Mambika clutches a protective charm against her chest, her eyes darting nervously. It is a sign, whispers one elder. Asita's spirit is unsettled. Another counters, no spirit leaves blood behind unless wronged. But Chief Mwanga slams his staff into the ground. This is no time for superstition. We angered the ancestors with imbalance, we must restore harmony. He orders livestock, goats, chickens, even a white calf, to be sacrificed and their blood spilled at the water's edge as an offering. The sacrifices begin. Drums beat slowly. Incantations rise. The animals are brought, one by one, to the river. Their blood is poured where the current runs crimson. Still the water's color does not fade. In fact, the red hue spreads further downstream, painting the land in an unnatural glow. By nightfall, strange things begin to happen. A woman drawing water from her well drops her gourd with a scream. Inside the well, a whisper had called her name, gently but insistently. Another man, returning from his fields, hears a humming lullaby echoing from the stream he used to play in as a boy. The sounds are soft but chilling, and every whisper ends with the same word, justice. The villagers become restless. Some believe the river is speaking, that it has become a mouthpiece for the ancestors, or worse, for Asita. Children wake crying from dreams of red water and a girl with glowing skin reaching toward them. One elder dreams of a single eye floating above the river, unblinking. Rumors twist like vines. One woman claims her cooking pot hissed when she boiled river water. Another says her child spoke in a voice not his own after sipping from the stream. Fear settles in like damp, heavy fog. Mambika grows pale. She tightens her hold on the chief, whispering ideas of exile for anyone who speaks Asita's name. But even she isn't spared. In the privacy of her bathing hut, she opens her water jar and finds not water, but red river silt packed into the shape of a heart. The chief orders guards to station near the river at night, but they report unsettling occurrences, shadowy figures in the mist, the sound of chains dragging through the reeds, and once, a chorus of soft weeping that stopped only when the moon vanished. A group of brave elders gather to consult the oracle, a blind seer who lives far beyond the Niall's reach. When they return, their faces are pale, their silence loud. The river has memory, one finally says. It remembers all who are thrown into it, especially those who go unwillingly. The next day, water is drawn again from the sacred pools, still crimson. The whispering grows louder, now heard not only in wells and streams, but even in drinking gourds and pots left open too long. The whispers tell of betrayal, of lies, of a name, Asita. As fear seeps into every corner of the village, a single truth begins to bloom like the red current itself. Something was done in secret under the cover of night. And the sacred river will not forget. Not until someone speaks. Not until someone atones. The storm broke the sky in half. Thunder cracked the heavens like a whip, and rain hissed as it touched the cursed river. All of Nkara had shuttered their windows, burning bitter roots to ward off bad omens. The elders sat trembling in their huts, their palms sweating despite the cold. Children whimpered in corners. Dogs howled but wouldn't step near the water. And then someone screamed. At the river's edge, where the crimson water lapped against the mud like a living tongue, something moved. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the branches or the rain or the shifting current. It was a figure. She rose slowly as if the river was lifting her, not letting her climb but delivering her, a gift or a curse no one could tell. Her hair clung to her back like river vines, heavy and wet. Her white shift clung to her like a second skin, though it was torn and covered in streaks of clay and blood. Her skin, once brown and warm like any child of Nkara, now glistened as if made of river stone. Her eyes were no longer brown, they were silver. Not the silver of coins or jewelry, but the cold silver of lightning before it strikes. Asita had returned. She said nothing. Her lips did not part. She didn't blink or sway. She walked, slow, deliberate, barefoot through the village as if she had never left. But the ground remembered. Each step left a smear of red mud prints that refused to fade with the rain. The first place she stopped was the chief's hut. A grand building, taller than the others, lined with spears and guarded by a carved wooden snake. The guards stepped back, stunned into silence. None could bring themselves to draw their weapons. Something deeper than fear rooted them in place. Her presence pressed into their chests like a stone. She bent down, hands coated in wet soil, and placed both palms flat at the doorstep. She did not speak. The ground beneath the chief's house groaned. Wooden beams cracked. The carved snake split down its middle. One of the house's corners sank slightly, as if the foundation had softened into a bog. The chief's wife, Mambika, once proud and venom-tongued, shrieked from inside. She pushed open the door, face pale and smeared with sleeping ash. "Begone. You're dead. You were drowned." Asita didn't even look at her. She turned and walked toward the next home. A woman's hut. The same woman who accused her of poisoning her son. Asita knelt again, hands to soil. Inside the hut, the oil lamp cracked and went out. The boy began to cough. The mother, panicking, grabbed charms and amulets, but they burned her hands. Outside, Asita simply walked on. Every hut where a curse had been spoken against her, she visited. With each stop, something changed. Where she touched, the ground hardened or crumbled. The grass yellowed. The air grew heavier. Cracks opened in clay walls. Fires went out on their own. Goats bleated nervously and tried to escape their ropes. People began to come out, drawn by terror or guilt or awe. Some fell to their knees and begged forgiveness. Others screamed and ran. A few, trembling, tried to touch her feet, only to recoil with a gasp. Her skin was cold, not with the chill of water, but with the stillness of the grave. She never spoke. Not a word. Yet all knew what she was saying. At the edge of the village, by the fig trees, was her mother's grave. Marked only by 3 river stones and a small gourd of dried herbs, it had long been forgotten by most. Asita knelt before it, not with ceremony but as a daughter mourning in silence. From her belt, no one had seen her carry it, She pulled a tiny sachet of dried riverweed and crushed it in her hands. The scent drifted through the wind, not sour but sweet. The kind of scent that reminded elders of birth, of healing, of blood when it means life instead of death. Then she turned back to the village. And with one breath, just one whisper through her silver eyes, the rain stopped. Not slowly. Instantly. The sky remained black, but the rain that had pelted for days hung in the air, droplets frozen like suspended beads. Then they reversed, rising back into the sky like smoke drawn back into a pipe. Everyone stared. And she walked back to the river. This time, the water parted before her. Not with violence, not with drama, but as a child moves aside for their elder. The red hue remained, but now it shimmered, as if light danced just beneath the surface. She stepped in. One foot then the other. And again she was lowered, gently this time by unseen hands. She vanished below. But the footprints remained. And the soil she had touched never recovered. From that day no one spoke her name above a whisper. The river stayed red for 7 more seasons. And no one dared bathe in it again. The village survived, but it never thrived. The crops returned but were never as sweet. The drums played again but cracked more easily. The children played near the fig trees but never touched the 3 river stones by the grave. Because everyone knew, Asita still watched. She no longer ate with the villagers. She no longer sang or healed or gathered herbs. She ate with the river now. And it had remembered her. Under the twisted boughs of the banyan tree where she had sat in silence for years, Nana Beina's voice cracked through the thick air like the cry of a hawk. It was the first time anyone in the village had heard her speak since her eyes had turned white from the blaze that took her shrine. Her silence had become legend, and so, when she began to speak, even the wind seemed to hush. She called for the chief, for the elders, for Mambika. Her voice was old, but each word held weight, like stones cast into the blood-colored river. "You have drowned not a child, not a curse, but a daughter of the river itself," she said. The people crowded close, afraid but curious, their memories of Asita's return still fresh, her silver eyes, her dripping form, her wordless retribution. Some crossed themselves with herbs. Others clutched charms. Nana Beina told the story that had never been spoken in full. Years ago, a woman named Neil had come from the river on a moonlit tide. She bore no name before that, only water. She lived among the villagers for a time, healing the sick, blessing the rains, marrying a hunter. That woman was Asita's mother. But when her time came to give birth, she walked into the river, sang an ancient song and let the water take her. In her place it returned Asita, wrapped in reeds, crying with a sound that split the river's flow. She was not born of pain, Nana Beina rasped. She was born of promise. The river Nile gave her to us as a keeper, a listener of ancestor voices, a guardian. And you threw her back as if she were rot. The crowd was stunned into silence. Even Mambika stood unmoving, her veil trembling. The chief tried to deny the tale, claiming Beina was addled with age. But the villagers had seen too much. They had felt the whispers in their wells, the trembling in the ground, the way their fields refused to yield. They had seen the red river, the silver-eyed girl walking without breath. Beina raised her hands to the sky, trembling. The river did not kill her. It remembered her. That night, some villagers brought offerings to the river's edge. They wept into the red currents, asking forgiveness. But the river did not answer them. Asita had not spoken since her return, yet her presence lingered in every shadow. Cracks spread like veins across the village. Cows refused to drink. Babies were born silent. The chief summoned his warriors to silence Nana Beina, accusing her of feeding hysteria. But none dared raise a hand against her. When they tried, their blades rusted in their sheaths. One soldier's hands blackened when he reached for her arm. The village healer declared it river rot. Beina stayed under the banyan tree, unmoving as if rooted. She said the river had waited decades for its voice to rise again, and now that it had spoken, justice must follow. The people were to decide, offer the one who commanded Asita's death, or watch the village crumble. It was a dangerous choice. To name names would unravel power, topple tradition. But silence had already drowned their children and dried their roots. In the dark of morning, Beina spoke again, not to the crowd but to Asita herself, who stood near the cracked village square. "You are the echo of the old water," she whispered. "The time for justice has arrived." Asita looked to the banyan tree, then to the river, then to the chief's compound. The final tide had begun to rise. The riverbank was quiet, save for the rhythm of ripples brushing the stones like whispered breaths. Asita stood where she had once been cast away, her toes sunken into the damp soil, her long dark hair dripping like roots newly pulled from the earth. Above her, the sky churned in muted grays as if the clouds, too, awaited her decision. The river Nile no longer bled. Its waters shimmered with a soft glow, shifting from deep crimson to radiant gold in the moonlight, reflecting Asita's face back at her. Not the face of the girl they once scorned, but a vessel transformed. Her eyes held the glint of silver rivers, her skin bore the faint sheen of riverstone, and when she blinked, the reeds nearby bowed as if in reverence. She stepped forward. The waters parted for her feet. From the mist above the river rose a shape, tall, flowing, wrapped in veils of water and light. The spirit of her mother. Asita didn't need to be told. The presence felt like home. The same warmth that once cradled her in dreams. The same sorrow that had followed her since birth. "My child," the spirit said, though her lips did not move. The voice echoed from inside Asita's bones. "You have awakened what was buried. You carry the river's memory, and its rage." Asita closed her eyes. She thought of the villagers, their eyes full of fear when she returned, their mouths spilling apologies only after their roofs cracked and fields died. She thought of Mambika, moaning behind shuttered windows, of the chief's temples slick with sweat as frogs croaked from his bathing pot. Of the elders, quiet now, faces pressed to the earth in desperate silence. "They killed me," Asita whispered, her voice like stone striking stone. "They chose to believe a lie. They wanted a sacrifice and now they fear the truth." The river spirit stirred. Her translucent veil fluttered like liquid flame. "You have a choice." Asita looked up. Around them, the river shimmered brighter. The current slowed. "You may remain," her mother said. "Let justice continue. Let the soil remember your touch. Let their children taste their parents' poison. Let their bloodlines wither and their names vanish into silt." Asita's fingers curled. For a moment, the golden glow dulled, shifting again to red. Thunder growled from beyond the hills. "Or," the spirit said gently, "you may become the river's guide. Its wisdom. Its warning. Walk among them but no longer against them. Teach them the law of balance. Forgive, and water may once again give life." Asita wavered. In her chest, two rivers flowed, one of fire, one of light. The pain they'd carved into her was deep. The betrayal, the fear, the cold of drowning, all still lived in her marrow. But beneath it, something else pulsed. The river's hum. The sacred song of guardianship. Of healing. Of belonging. "Why should I spare them?" she asked. The spirit stepped forward, reaching out a hand that shimmered like mist. "Because you are no longer only yourself. You are Niall's daughter. And vengeance, though satisfying, is always thirsty." Asita's lips parted. From deep within the water, a chorus of whispers rose. Children's laughter, lullabies, voices of the old gods, the splash of her mother's final breath as she birthed her into the river's arms. She remembered helping old women with fevers, the joy in a child's eyes when she'd cured his rash, the songs she'd hummed while grinding roots into poultices. She hadn't been evil. She'd been kind, and kind people were too often mistaken for weak ones. But now she had power. And with it she could end all of them. Or lift them. It was hers to decide. She looked to the banks where villagers now gathered in the distance. Some on their knees, some with faces streaked in ash, others clutching offerings of fruit and woven cloth. Even Mambika was there, hair undone, eyes hollow. Their fear no longer pleased her. It wearied her. Asita inhaled and the wind answered her. The ground beneath her feet pulsed, once, twice. Then the river spirit lifted her arm. "Choose, my daughter." The golden light around Asita flared. She stepped into the water, let it rise to her chest, her chin. The river folded her in a gentle embrace. Silence. Then the wind shifted and the water began to hum. Asita rose again, not walking this time, but lifted by a current unseen. Her feet never touched the earth. She glided across the river and back to the bank, not as wrath, but as the river's guide. Her eyes no longer burned with silver fire. Instead, they glowed with deep blue, like calm waters before dawn. The sky broke open above. Rain fell, soft, clean, forgiving. It soaked the cracked fields. It ran over clay walls. It kissed the heads of those who bowed. The frogs vanished. The wells cleared. Asita stood still. Behind her, the river Nile sang again. But the choice would always remain, buried like a blade in the deep, should they ever forget. Names, 900 words, asterisk asterisk. The sky rippled with light rain as Asita stood still at the riverbank, the glow of dawn catching on her silvered eyes. Her footprints were soft impressions in the wet soil, but no water clung to her. Behind her, the village watched from a distance. The brave ones hidden behind doorways, the cowards behind others. No one dared to step close. The river Nile no longer flowed in silence. It murmured in a tongue older than the village, in rhythms older than drums, in memories older than any human mouth could retell. One side shimmered with familiar clarity, the blue-green transparency of childhood summers and sacred rituals. But the other half bled a slow, pulsing red, like the steady heartbeat of the earth itself. Isida did not speak. Her body was clothed in reeds and the river's moss, her hair trailing like dark vines down her back. Where her shadow touched the ground, small puddles formed. She had returned not as girl, not as ghost, but as something else entirely, a vessel holding both breath and current, wrath and healing. The village elders convened, though many could barely look at one another. The guilt of their silence, their cowardice, was heavier than their bones. The chief stood with a wrapped hand, bitten days ago by a serpent that had appeared in his bed without warning. His wife, Mambika, had not been seen since her screams shook the compound and her skin turned black beneath the tongue. The people whispered now not about Isida but about themselves. The children, oddly, were the first to walk near her. Not with fear but with wonder. They carried bundles of crushed flowers and pieces of bread. Some dropped small beads or dolls made of cloth and sticks. They didn't speak and neither did she. She accepted the gifts in silence, placing each one beside her on a flat stone, now turned into something sacred. Isida began to build. Not with bricks or hands that sought shelter, but with something deeper. Each day she planted reeds in deliberate circles. She carved symbols into bark and stone. She whispered to the roots of trees. Birds gathered near her camp. Frogs sang louder on her side of the river. She dug with her hands until a hollow formed, wide and deep, and lined it with smooth stones. That would be the shrine. The river's new mouth. People began to come, slowly at first. A mother who had lost her child to fever brought a lock of hair and wept by the shrine. She left, eyes swollen but her breath lighter. A man whose goats had died under a red sky brought milk in a calabash. He returned a week later to find green shoots sprouting from his cracked field. The ones who brought honesty, pain offered freely, guilt laid bare, were met with silence but always left changed. But those who came to plead for power, to beg forgiveness without regret, or to bribe the river, they found nothing. The red side of the river hissed when they approached. One man who tried to mock her left with his mouth frozen, unable to speak. Another who spat at the shrine found his own well full of thorns. Old Nana Beina lived near the shrine now, in a small clay hut that never cracked even in rainstorms. She did not speak again but her presence was known. Sometimes she sat with Isida. Sometimes she stared at the horizon, blind eyes turned to wind and wave. Between them, words were no longer necessary. Isida's dreams became the river's dreams. She saw the future as ripples, the past as sediments stirred by storms. Sometimes she cried in her sleep and the rain would fall gently. Sometimes she laughed without reason and frogs would leap across the fields. She did not age as others did. Her hair grew longer but her face stayed the same, smooth, unreadable like a calm lake that could become a flood. Years passed. The village changed. People planted with more care. Children learned to listen before they spoke. No one dared dump waste into the river. Even during drought, the red half of the river never dried. It flowed steadily, sometimes glowing at night like a lantern in the dark. Birds circled it but never flew across. And when thunder rolled in, people lit small lamps near the shrine to ask for mercy. Not everyone accepted the balance. One elder, bitter and aged, once said aloud, "We have made a god of a girl." The next morning his house was swallowed by the earth, but no one heard a sound. Only a small hummingbird circled the spot where his roof had been. Isida never asked for worship. She never demanded chants or carvings in her image. Her shrine held only the gifts of the innocent, beads, flowers, drawings made in dust by small fingers. She healed sometimes, a swollen leg here, a broken heart there. But she punished too, not with anger but with stillness. She would sit in front of someone, eyes open, unmoving. And they would feel themselves unravel beneath her gaze. The river sang to her. Not in words but in emotions. When a child was born, the river would rise slightly like a breath inhaled. When someone lied beneath the sacred tree, the red side would ripple as though disturbed. Isida always knew. She didn't need names. The river carried all of them within its flow. One night, a stranger came, a traveler from beyond the southern ridge. He had heard of the Red River and the girl who lived beside it. He carried books bound in goat skin and maps drawn with burnt charcoal. He believed her to be a myth. When he arrived at the shrine he scoffed. A spirit girl? A guardian of water? Tales for frightened peasants. Isita looked at him for a long time. Then she touched the water just once and the river replied. The man fell to his knees. He wept without knowing why. He left his books behind and never crossed a river again in his life. Years turned to decades. Isita stayed. She grew taller perhaps. Wiser certainly. Her skin glowed faintly during storms, her presence always known by the smell of rain and the sudden hush of animals. Children born in the village were brought to her before they were named. She would look at them, say nothing and nod, or turn away. The ones she turned from often grew strange and wild, like weeds in the sun. A generation rose that never knew the full blue river. To them, the crimson side was normal, a warning and a guide, a mystery that lived beside them like shadow. Parents told stories of the girl thrown into the water, the whispers from the wells, the glowing spears. But those stories always ended with this, asterisk, and now she watches. And she remembers, asterisk. One dry season the crops began to fail. The wind turned foul. People gathered by the shrine in silence. Isita stood before them, taller than they remembered, her eyes glowing like moonlight on oil. She spoke for the first time in years. Balance is not peace, she said. It is memory. Then she stepped into the river, not to vanish but to merge. The water shimmered around her, silver and red. Fish leapt at her feet. Frogs fell silent. And from that day on she was no longer seen. But she was felt. When a lie was told, a pot would crack. When someone spoke kindly, a flower would bloom where none had before. If a child cried for no reason, parents would check their hearts. And when the river sang louder than the trees, the village would listen. They never built walls near the water again. They never forgot her name. And the river, half red, half clear, never forgot them.